Welcome, Clarity Coders. Today we're going to do a portfolio level project. I think the most important part of you finding a job programming is going to be actually writing code and showing people you can complete projects. Now, this project can be used in almost any work environment, even in a home environment. And it's going to be writing a script that can check to see whether computers or servers are up and running and how much downtime they've had. So in this program, we're going to use server sockets to connect to see if a certain port on a server is open. And I'm also going to show you how you can use SSL if that server requires SSL, and how you can send a simple ping command if it's just a regular computer or something that doesn't accept connections from a certain socket. If you like these videos and want more, please subscribe and like the video. If you need the code, it'll be linked below. If there are any errors with this script, I will update that GitHub so you can see the latest and greatest version of this script. Let's not waste any more time and let's jump right in. Now, like with most of our other projects, I'm just going to open a project folder. So I've created a folder on the desktop called server check. I'm going to go ahead and open that up, create a new file. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm just going to call it checkserver.py. Now this is going to be my base file here. And I'm going to use some imports at the top of this file. Now these are the imports that I'm going to use for this program. So what we have here on the first line, we are going to import socket. This is going to allow us to connect to different servers on a certain socket by a certain port. We're also going to import SSL. That's going to be so we can wrap our socket connection in SSL if the server requires it. We're going to import datetime so we can keep track of what time the server was down or up when we get a response. And we're going to import pickle. If you haven't used pickle before, it's going to allow us to propagate our data from run to run with this program. So normally when our Python file finishes running, all the data is going to be lost in it unless we save that data in a database of some sort. We want a little easier script version of that. So we are going to keep track of the server's history, their uptime and downtime. And we want that to happen even if we reboot this check server or anything like that. So we're going to save all of our data after the program finishes running in a pickle file. Now we also want to be able to ping just plain computers. So most computers are going to have some type of firewall that doesn't let you connect to certain sockets, unlike a web server where you can connect to port 80 or something like that. So we're also going to import a couple more libraries that are going to help that. We're going to import subprocess and import platform. Now this is going to help tell us if we're running on a Windows or a Unix system. So we can go ahead and save this and run it, and it looks like we should be good to go. So there are a lot of different ways to do this, but I'm going to create a class because I want to use this server class in other programs as well. So that's how I'm going to set it up. So I'm going to start this by saying class and then naming my class. I'm going to name it server. So what we're going to do here is we're going to define what attributes make up a quote unquote server. Now this might not be a server on your home network. It might just be a plain old laptop that you see is running, or your PlayStation, whatever you want. So I'm going to create an initialization function here. What that's going to do is it's going to define what a server is when I create a server. Now, I do actually want to pass some items into this server. So I'm going to keep track of the name of the server, the port that I'm trying to connect to, the connection type, and the priority. Now, these were defined by me. You can add more or add less, whatever you would like. But what I'm setting up here is I'm allowing the user to pick a name of the server, the port they want to connect to, the connection type. This is going to be SSL, plain, or ping in my case here. And then the priority. And that priority is going to, in this program, how I have it set up, it's going to depend on whether or not I send an alert. So for a low priority server, if it goes down, I'm not going to do anything. If it's a high priority server, I'm going to go ahead and send myself an alert email, which we're going to use the program that we did a couple weeks ago where we sent out email alerts via Gmail. Now we're going to go ahead and set these attributes on the class. So I'm going to say self.name equals name. You'll notice I named the class attribute the same as the argument that I passed in above. It doesn't have to be the same. I just did. I'm going to do the same with port. Self.port equals port. You guessed it. Self.connection equals connection. And self.priority equals priority. Nothing too surprising there. Now, one thing that we're going to do in this program, we're going to pass in our connection type as strings. I'm going to go ahead and move that to lowercase, whatever they pass in. And I'm also going to do that with priority. Now, what that's going to allow me to do is if someone capitalizes high priority, they say capital H-I-G-H, I'm going to save it just all in lowercase. So I'm going to take care of that right away. And now I also want to keep some history on my server. So I'm going to set up a list here just called self.history, spelled correctly. And that's just going to be an empty list, and we can store some history. So we don't want to just remember the last time we tested it. We want to remember maybe a block of 1,000, 100, 1,000, whatever it is. And I'm also going to say have a self.alert that I set equal to false. Now, this is a little weird, but say we run this script every 5 minutes. If we send an alert that a server is down and it stays down for the next hour, I might not want to send an email or a text message every 5 minutes. So I'm just going to send the alert once. So I'm going to have a little check flag here. And that's pretty much all that's going to make up our server. Now, inside of this class as well, I'm going to create a function that's going to take care of actually testing the connection. So we can call that function whatever we want. I'm going to call it check connection. I'm going to pass in self. If you're confused by the class setup here, you can check out this video where I go a little more in depth on how classes work. Now, basically, we're going to check the connection based on all these things we pass in when we create a server. So you can imagine when we run this program, we're going to have something like server 1, and it's going to equal server reddit.com, the port we want to connect on, the connection type, and the priority. So now we're going to use these attributes in here to actually check that connection. So I'm going to create a variable right away to hold a message. Now this is going to tell me different things about the connection, how it failed or if it succeeded, stuff like that. I'm going to check the success of the connection, and I'm just going to store that as false right now. So by default, I'm going to assume that the connection failed. And I'm also going to grab the current time. I'm going to say date time now. Now I'm going to actually do my checks. So whatever the server is that we're working with here, remember we're working with self, so we're just talking about this current object. So in the example I created below, we're just talking about reddit.com, for example. I'm going to try and make a connection. And I'm using a try except block because if it fails for any reason or throws an error, I'm going to assume that the connection was either refused by the server or the server was down, whatever the case may be. So I'm going to go ahead and try, and then inside of this try block, I'm going to have different options dependent on the connection type. So we'll start with just a plain connection. So we're going to say if self.connection equals plain. Let's try and make a connection. So we're going to use our socket.createConnection. The first argument is going to be a tuple. We're going to pass in the name or the location, I guess. So this could be an IP address, a web address, anything like that. I called it name. It's more of a address, really. And then self.port. So this is going to be whatever port we want to connect to. And then we can also specify a timeout. I'm going to give it 10 seconds here. So now what's going to happen is if this connection here fails, it's going to go down to the accept part of our try block. So you can imagine we have some type of accept down here. I'll just pass for right now. So if this throws an error, if this connection doesn't work, we're never going to run this next line. So if we do get to, in this case, if we do get to line 27, that means that this connection here was successful. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and create my success message here. So I'm going to overwrite my message variable, and I'm going to use an F string, and I'm going to pass in self.name. I'll just say is up on port. And I'll also say with the connection type. So if this connection is successful, in our example of the server I created below, it's going to say reddit.com is up on port 80 with plain. So again, if this fails, it's going to jump down the accept, and we'll handle those in just a second. So our next, we're going to do an elif, and we're going to say self.connection equals SSL. So this is going to be the same as above with one exception. Watch out, I forgot an equal sign here. This is going to be the same as above with one exception. We're going to wrap our socket connection in SSL. So I'm going to copy this line from above. And the only change I'm going to do SSL.wrap socket. and I'm going to wrap this whole connection in our SSL. So assuming this doesn't fail, it will make it down to the next line. And I'm just going to copy and paste that same message that I have above. Now, remember the connection type is going to update. So if it gets here, this is going to say SSL instead. And then we have one more case here. So I'm just going to say else. So no matter what anyone puts in, if they don't get SSL or plain written in the connection type, then I'm going to treat it as just a plain ping of the server. Now this case is going to be a little special, so I'm going to create my own function for this, and I'll walk you through what I'm doing here. So I just pasted in this block of code. This is going to allow us to actually ping a server. I made it its own function because in our case here, I had to handle some edge cases. You might be on a Unix or a Mac system, or you might be on a Windows system. So what we're going to do here is we're going to get the output of pinging our server, which we input here in self.name. Now, depending on whether you're on a Windows computer or something else, we're going to run a different command based on that. But either way, it's going to return true if the connection was successful, or it will return false if the connection failed. And remember, you can grab this code from my GitHub as well if you don't want to type it all out here. So in our else case here, I'm going to call that ping function. I'm just going to say if ping, I got to do self.ping actually. So remember from our function below, this will be true. This will return true if we successfully ping our server. So this if statement will only run if we're able to ping our server. So as you can imagine, if we do successfully ping our server, the only thing we want to do is create our success message. So we're going to paste that same success message inside of this little script here. So that should handle all of our cases. No matter what, we're going to test our server in some fashion. And now on these cases, if they're successful, I also want to flip our success to true. So now we know that this has made a successful connection in each of these cases. Now I also want to set my alert back to false if it had been flipped. So if in the past we had sent out an alert, it would be marked true now. But now that we've successfully got our server back up, we want to know if it goes down again. So I'm going to go ahead and flip our server alert back to false. Now I'm going to throw some special except cases down here. So the first one I want to throw in here is except socket timeout. So this is going to be a case where the connection isn't refused, but it's also not successful. So you could change this message to be reflective of that. So we could change this to something like timeout or something like that. Now my second edge case here is the connection is refused or reset. So again, this could be, you could put your own error message here so it's a little more descriptive. I actually just wrote out the server name and then I just spit out the very specific error here. And then finally, I have a catch-all. So finally at the end, I just grabbed the exception as E and I just threw out a little message that says, I have no clue what happened because I'm not sure why the server didn't connect. So it's going to spit that out on my error message. And these should handle all of our cases. So we have our success up here, we have our failures down here, and at the end of this function, the only thing we have left to do is make a call to set our history. Now I'm going to create a separate function for this. I don't want to do it in this function because this function is getting kind of long already. So I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to call it create_history, and I'm just going to pass in our message, our success variable, and the current time and date. Now, obviously, I haven't created this function yet, so now we got to go and create it. So we got our function call here. Let's go ahead and just create it right below here so we can watch, so we can see our call above. So I'm going to create history. So now I'm creating that function that we are calling above. The first thing I did in my create history is define how many items of history I want to keep. I don't want this program or this file to get too out of control. So I'm only going to create 100 different instances per server. So that could be dependent because if you run this program every minute, you're going to have a lot more history or a lot less history than if you run it every hour in terms of how many days of history you have and things like that. So this is very dependent on your situation, but I'm just going to save 100 as a nice round number. And then I'm going to take my self variable. I'm going to reach into that history list that we created above. Remember, we have a history list on our server. And I'm going to dot append. And I'm actually going to append a tuple because I don't want to change anything to it. I'm going to append the message, the success variable, and the current date time. Now I'm going to say while the length of self.history is greater than my history max, I'm going to pop off the first item in that list. So what I'm doing here is if my history has 101 items in it, that's going to be greater than the amount I want to store that I've defined in history max. So I'm going to take that history and I'm going to pop off the oldest item in that history. So I'm never going to get more than 100 items in my history. And that's pretty much it. So we can go ahead and try and run this program. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add this line, and you've probably seen it from time to time. I think I've shown it in my programs before. We're going to make sure that this is the main program that we're running. And this is going to allow us to not do the server check if we just want to import our server class in another program or something like that. So I'm only going to run this server check if it's the main program. So that's only if I'm running this file directly. And I'm going to simply create a list of servers. So I'm going to say servers equals, and I'm going to create a list. And I'll close off that list. And we can add as many servers to this as we would like. And this last one here isn't a server. So the port actually we're not going to use. I'm going to change this to ping, and I'm just going to call it by its IP address. So I'm going to say 192.168.1.64. Actually, my wife's laptop. So now we have our list of servers that we want to check. Now, every time we run this program, I want to say for a server in my list of servers, we want to do server.checkConnection. Then after that, just for our debugging purposes right now, let's print out server.history, and we're going to print out -1. So that's going to take the last thing that was appended to the history. So it should be the last instance of us running this connection test. All right, we've been coding a little bit. We haven't ran a lot of stuff. So let's go ahead and run this program and see what we got. And you can see our create history through a error. So create history, we obviously needed to pass in all of our variables. So we're going to add some parameters here as well. And they're going to match what we passed in above. They don't have to name-wise, but we're going to have them. We'll try and run this again. This is SMTP rather. Now you can see we got our Gmail one working, using 465 with smtp.gmail.com. And I had a number off. I'm just full of typos today. I had a number off on my wife's computer, so it's actually 164. So let's try and run this one more time with everything correct. And you'll see it goes through here. It tests each of our servers, and it checks the last value in history. So you can see reddit.com is up on port 80 with plain. Same for MSN. Gmail is up using SSL, and my wife's computer is also up on port 80 using ping. Well, we didn't really send it on port 80. That's not totally true, but you can see we got it working. What we don't have is every time we run this, you'll notice if I get the length of the history, which should be increasing, right? Because we're only popping stuff off once we have 100. So if I run this, you'll notice each time we have just one value in history because our data is not persisting between runs. So that's where we're going to use pickle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and find our pickle file, which obviously doesn't exist right now. So I'm going to say servers equals, and I'm just going to load in whatever was in our pickle file. Now our pickle file is going to be the server list itself. So I'm going to say load, and then I'm going to open up. The first argument is going to be our file name. So I'm just going to call our file servers.pickle. And I'm going to open that with read bytes permissions. Now, if that file doesn't exist, which is the case right now, I'm going to create a whole new servers list. So the first time running this, we can just create these servers. Any other time, we're gonna have a pickle file to grab. Now, after we run this, we obviously need to save our data to our pickle file. So after our for loop, we're gonna do pickle.dump. We're gonna take whatever we want to save in the file. So in this case, I'm gonna save our list of servers, and I'm gonna open our servers.pickle file. Remember, you gotta name this the same as the file you're loading in, and we're gonna write bytes permissions. That should be it. So now, using this little change here, we can run this, and the first time we run this, this is going to fail. It's not gonna find the pickle file, so it's gonna load up all of our servers. But you'll notice this time something different happened. We created a pickle file over here that we're gonna use as a data file. So if I run this again, you'll notice that my history is increasing. So if I hook this up to a scheduled task, I can keep testing these servers over time and keep track of when they're up and down. Now, you may think of something here, but what happens if I decide to change this? So if I decide to change this and add another server here, you'll notice something, and that is we don't test all 5 servers. We're still just testing the original 4, and that's because this block of code doesn't run because it found the pickle file. So we have an option here. We could delete our pickle file. And now you'll notice we do test all 5 servers, but unfortunately we've lost all of our history. So we're back to the start here with our history. So we want to add a script that we can change these servers without probably losing all of our history in this program. So we'll build up a little history here. And I'm going to copy a script. This will be in my GitHub, so I'm not going to make you watch me type it out. But I just added a tiny little program here that can add servers to our pickle file. So the only thing this does is it imports pickle, and from check servers, it imports our server. So it's going to look at this file. It has to be in the same directory, and it's going to import this server class. So it's going to load in our pickle file, and it's going to ask you to add a server, and it's going to prompt you for some different values here. So remember, we had 5 servers with 4 things of history. So if I run this file, you can see we actually called it check server, not check servers. I'll correct that and run it again here. You'll see it says enter the server name. Now remember, this is the address, not the server name. And we'll do python.org. That seems fitting. We'll enter the port number of 80. Let's use plain again. We'll set it as high priority. Cool. So now you can see that this program finished and nothing really happened. But now the big change here is if I go back to check server and run again, you'll see that not only do we have the history from our old servers, but we also have the history from our new server. Now, of course, I also wanted to add in my Gmail module here. So if you haven't watched my Gmail alert program, you should check that out. But basically, I create a program that will send email alerts through Gmail that you can set up. And we create it as a class so we can import it into other projects. So you can watch this video if you want to see how to create this, or you can reach out to the GitHub. I'll have it on there that you can set this up as well. And all we're going to do is we're going to import that class into our project. So from Gmail, we're going to import email alert. Now on the GitHub, I'll probably have this commented out because you'll have an error if you don't have your password and all that jazz set up. And then before we create our history, I'm going to send an alert. So this is my send alert if statement. I'm going to say if our success is false, so if we weren't successful in connecting and we haven't sent an alert already, so if the self.alert is false as well, we need to send an alert. So we're going to go ahead and change that value to true, and we're going to email this alert out. So my email takes 2 arguments. It takes, the first is the message, and the second is where you want to send it. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to change this to also print out our last history item as well, spelled correctly. And I've turned off my wife's computer, so we're going to test it that way. So I'll run this again, and you can see that they all pass with one exception here. This is my wife's computer that has failed to pass. You see it's got a false for the success. And you can see if I pull open my email here, I got a nice alert email that my wife's computer is down. That's pretty much it. So this is a fun script that you can continue to play around with. There's some obvious room for improvement here. One, we could map how much uptime and downtime the server has. So we could make changes to actually display that. You could just create another file in this directory and map it out or display it however you want with percentages or whatever it is. I did create a little get stats program. So I'm going to go ahead and just run this for you real quick. Same thing, it's going to look at our pickle file loaded in, and it's going to print out the history of each server and how much uptime that server has. Add times 100, so it's in a percentage. And if I run this, you can see Reddit has been up 100% of the time. MSN 100% of the time. Gmail 100% of the time. My wife's computer 83% of the time because it failed one time. So again, nothing fancy here, but you can see how you can improve on these projects. So all these files will be on the GitHub. The Gmail one will not have my password in it, obviously, and I'll have that commented out inside of the check server because if you don't have it set up, it'll throw an error. But you can watch my video to get that set up as well. And you should have a really high level portfolio project. If you have any questions on this project or you want to grow this project into something bigger, hop into this Discord and we can work you through any problems you have. If not, I will see you next time. As always, keep coding.